At 50, Tiger Woods finally admits something most people never expected to hear. Not about his victories, not about his records, but about the 5 players who at different moments in his career pushed him into places he couldn't fully control. These weren't just great golfers, they were different. Some refused to react, some never faded, some broke the rhythm of the game itself, and one represented something Tiger couldn't stop. From quiet dominance to unpredictable brilliance, from relentless discipline to near-perfect consistency, each of these players forced Tiger Woods to adjust in ways most people never noticed. This is not a list about who won more. This is about who made Tiger Woods uncomfortable. Watch until the end, because the final name changes everything. What does it take to make Tiger Woods hesitate? What kind of player could stand across from the most feared man in golf and leave no trace of doubt on his own face? What kind of name could follow Tiger through the years, through the noise, through the trophies, through the Sundays when the whole course seemed to belong to him? And what does it mean when a man who bent the sport around his will still remembers a handful of opponents who made him feel something far colder than pressure? There is an old image people still carry when they think of Tiger: the red shirt, the hard stare, the slow walk down the fairway with the crowd leaning in, already certain they were watching the ending before it arrived. But that image was never the whole truth, because even in those years, even when the scoreboard looked familiar and the galleries moved with him like a tide, there were moments when the air changed, moments when the course no longer felt like his stage, moments when somebody else set the rhythm and forced him to follow it. A volunteer once said he knew something was wrong by the silence. Not because the crowd had gone dead, but because Tiger had. No gesture, no glance, no anger, just that still unreadable look of a man trying to solve something that would not yield. Somewhere ahead, another player kept hitting the kind of shots that did not ask for permission. And for a few holes, maybe longer, the most imposing figure in the game looked like he was searching for a door that would not open. That is the version of this story people rarely tell. Not the victories everyone remembers, but the resistance he could never ignore. The men who did not blink, the men who did not fade, the 5 opponents who made Tiger Woods feel the game pushing back. He did not arrive quietly. When Tiger Woods stepped onto the professional stage, the game did not adjust slowly. It shifted all at once. Courses that had been designed for precision suddenly felt too small. Leaderboards that once moved gradually began to tilt. And players who had built their careers on patience found themselves trying to keep up with something faster, sharper, and far less forgiving. There was a certainty around him in those years, not arrogance in the way people often describe it, but something colder, a sense that once he found his rhythm, the outcome was no longer a question of if but when. You could see it in the way he walked between shots, never rushed, never searching. The crowd moved with him, not ahead of him. Even before the final holes, there was already a feeling that the story had been written. He did not just win tournaments. He controlled them. He controlled the pace, the atmosphere, even the expectations of the people watching. Sundays became something else entirely when he was in contention. The air tightened, the noise dropped, and somewhere between the first tee and the closing stretch, most players understood they were no longer playing the course. They were playing him. That is what made his presence so difficult to deal with. It was not just the distance or the iron play or the putting under pressure. It was the weight of it. The sense that if you made even a small mistake, he would not hesitate, and once he moved ahead, he rarely came back. For a long time, that was enough. Control the moment and the rest would follow. Control the pace and the field would eventually fall in line. That was the structure he built his career on. That was the version of the game he understood completely. But the structure was not unbreakable, because over the years, certain players did not step into that world and adapt to it. They brought something with them that did not bend, something that did not react the way most players did. And when that happened, the balance shifted, sometimes quietly, sometimes all at once. And that is where the story truly begins. There is a part of this story people rarely sit with long enough. Because when you talk about dominance, about control, about a player who could walk onto a course and make the entire field adjust to him, it is easy to assume that everyone felt it the same way, that everyone at some level reacted. But not everyone did. And that is where things begin to shift. Because the first player on this list did not try to outplay Tiger in the way most people understand competition. He did not challenge him with noise or presence or anything that demanded attention. He did something far more unsettling. He simply did not respond. Number 5. David Duval. When Tiger first came onto the tour, there was still a process unfolding beneath the surface. The results were there, the moments were there, but full control over the field, that takes time. It builds week by week, round by round, until other players begin to feel it before anything even happens. Most of them did. Duval did not. There was something about the way he carried himself that made everything around him feel distant. Not cold in an emotional sense, but detached from the usual signals players give off under pressure. No shift in tempo, no visible reaction when the stakes tightened. No sense that the moment had changed at all. And when you stand across from someone like that, something subtle begins to break. Because control in golf is not just about your swing, it is about how your presence affects the people around you. It is about knowing that if you stay patient, the other player will eventually feel it. With Duval, that expectation never quite arrived. There were stretches, especially in those years around the turn of the century, where looking at the leaderboard felt different, not because Tiger was playing poorly, but because the usual dynamic was missing. Duval was not chasing. He was not reacting. At times, he was simply there, level or even ahead, and that changes everything. Because when someone does not acknowledge your presence, even indirectly, you are forced into a different kind of battle, one that turns inward much faster than you expect. Tiger would later understand this more clearly, that not every opponent is affected by rhythm the same way, that some players exist entirely within their own pace, untouched by the pressure that defines everyone else. But at that point, it was something else. It was unfamiliar, and more importantly, it was unresolved. Because even at his best, even when everything felt in place, there were moments against Duval where the outcome did not feel like something he could fully shape. And that is not a comfortable place to be. But as difficult as that was, it was still only the beginning. Because the next player did not just resist pressure. He stayed there. Longer than anyone else was willing to. Number 4. Vijay Singh. If Duval was difficult to read, Vijay was impossible to outlast. The first thing people noticed was the work. Not in the way it was talked about, but in the way it never seemed to end. Long after rounds were finished, long after most players had stepped away, there were still stories of him on the range, repeating the same motion again and again until the light began to fade. It was not intensity in short bursts. It was something steadier, something that did not switch off. And when you compete against that, the game begins to feel different. Because you are no longer just measuring talent or timing. You are measuring how long you can stay inside the same level of focus without slipping. How many holes you can go without letting a single moment drift. How many days you can carry the same weight without feeling it build. With Vijay, that weight never seemed to move. There were weeks when the leaderboard felt less like a snapshot and more like a pattern. You would look up on Thursday, then again on Saturday, then again on Sunday, and the name would still be there. Not rising, suddenly not fading, and returning, just present. Constant. Close enough to matter, steady enough to never disappear. That kind of presence changes the rhythm of a tournament. Against most players, there is a sense that something will open. A missed fairway, a loose approach, a stretch where momentum breaks just enough for you to step in. With Vijay, those openings were rare. Not because he was playing spectacular golf every moment, but because he was playing the same controlled game over and over without interruption. And that forces a different kind of decision. You can wait and risk falling behind slowly. Or you can push and risk stepping outside your own game. Neither option is comfortable. There were stretches in those early 2000 years where the battle was no longer about a single round or a single major. It was about accumulation, week after week, result after result, until the pressure stopped feeling sharp and started feeling heavy. And that is where Vijay lived. Not in the highlight, not in the moment everyone remembers, but in the grind that most players quietly try to escape. For Tiger, that meant something had to change. Control was no longer enough. Precision was no longer enough. To stay ahead, he had to match something less visible. The discipline to remain locked in when nothing around you demands excitement. The willingness to keep going when the game offers no release. Because against someone who does not slow down even slightly, the margin for error does not arrive all at once. It builds. And by the time you feel it, you are already chasing. But if Vijay forced Tiger into endurance, the next name would take something else away entirely. Not time, not rhythm, but certainty. Number 3. Phil Mickelson. By the time this rivalry began to take shape, the structure of the game around Tiger felt complete. He understood the rhythm of a round, the way pressure moved through a leaderboard, the moments when patience would win, and the moments when it would break someone else. There was a system to it. a way of reading the course, the field, and the situation all at once. Phil did not follow that system. From the outside, it looked like freedom, imagination, the kind of talent that could produce something unforgettable out of nothing. But when you are standing on the same course, playing the same holes, trying to manage the same risks, it does not feel like creativity. It feels unstable, because you cannot map it. You cannot predict where it leads. You cannot build a plan around something that refuses to stay within the boundaries you expect. There were rounds where everything unfolded exactly as it should have. Fairways found irons, controlled putts, rolling on the right lines. The kind of golf that under normal conditions would slowly close the door on everyone else. And then Phil would do something that did not belong in that pattern. A decision that ignored percentage. A shot that most players would never attempt. A line that seemed to invite failure as much as success. And somehow, more often than it should, it worked. That is what changes the feeling of a tournament. Because now, you are no longer playing the course as it presents itself. You are reacting to someone who is rewriting it in real time. Augusta, mid-2000s. The air already tight, the margin already thin. Tiger is exactly where he needs to be, building the kind of round that has defined his career. Controlled, measured, inevitable in its progression. And then, on a hole that demands discipline, Phil chooses something else. Not the safe path. Not the expected play. A shot that hangs between brilliance and mistake with no middle ground. For a moment, everything pauses, then it lands, then it rolls, and suddenly, the entire balance of the tournament shifts. It is not just the result, it is what it does to the space around it. Because when someone proves they are willing to step outside the structure, you are forced into a question you do not want to answer. Do you stay within your system and risk being outpaced by something unpredictable, or do you follow them into uncertainty and risk losing the very thing that made you dominant? Against Phil, that question never really goes away. There were days when Tiger executed everything the way it should be done, and still found himself looking up at a leaderboard that did not reflect it. Not because he had made mistakes, but because the game in front of him had shifted into something less stable, and that is a different kind of pressure. Not the slow weight of someone staying beside you, not the quiet resistance of someone who refuses to react, but the feeling that the ground itself is no longer fixed. Phil did not need to control the game to challenge Tiger. He only needed to disrupt it, and once that disruption took hold, even briefly, control was no longer guaranteed. But as unsettling as that was, there was still a level beyond it. Because the next opponent did not break the structure. He removed every flaw from within it. Number 2, Ernie Els. If Phil introduced uncertainty, Ernie removed it. There was nothing chaotic about the way he played, nothing that asked for attention, no moment that forced you to react in the same way a bold decision or a risky line would. From the outside, it looked almost effortless. A smooth swing, an even tempo, a round that seemed to unfold without strain. But that surface was deceptive, because what sat underneath it was something far more difficult to deal with. Consistency without interruption. Fairways, greens, opportunities. Again and again without deviation, not in bursts, not in flashes, but in a sequence that did not break. And when that pattern holds long enough, it begins to create pressure of a different kind. Not sharp, not immediate, but steady, accumulating with every hole. Against most players, there is always a moment to recover. A missed shot you can absorb, a mistake on the other side that brings everything back into balance, a shift in momentum that gives you space to reset. Ernie did not offer that. Because he did not need to take risks to stay in control. He did not need to chase momentum or force a moment. He simply moved through the course without giving anything away. And when someone plays like that, the margin does not disappear all at once. It tightens. Slowly at first, almost unnoticed, then with more weight, until every decision begins to feel heavier than it should. There were major championships where this became clear. Not in a single dramatic exchange, not in one defining shot, but in the absence of mistakes. Hole after hole, round after round, the same standard held. And when you are facing that, you begin to understand something uncomfortable. Perfection is no longer an ideal. It becomes a requirement, because one loose swing, one misread, one lapse in focus is enough. Not to lose immediately, but to fall behind in a way that is difficult to recover from when the other player is not giving anything back. That changes how you think. You stop waiting for the opening because it may not come. You stop relying on momentum because there is nothing to disrupt. Everything turns inward. Every shot carries a different weight because you know the other side is not going to create an opportunity for you. Against Ernie, the game becomes exact, and in that space, even control feels fragile. Tiger had built his dominance on the ability to manage chaos, to absorb pressure, to respond when the moment demanded it. But here, there was nothing to respond to, only a standard that had to be matched, shot for shot, without error. And that is exhausting in a way few people understand. Not physically, but mentally. The constant demand to stay precise, to stay committed, to stay within a margin that does not forgive even the smallest drift. There were times when the only way to separate was to be flawless, and waiting for anything less on the other side was not a strategy. But even that was not the final step, because the last name on this list did not just challenge Tiger within the game he understood. He arrived playing a version of it that was already moving beyond it. Number 1. Rory McIlroy. By the time Rory arrived, the game did not feel the same anymore. Not in an obvious way at first. The courses were still the same, the majors still carried the same weight, the expectations around Tiger had not disappeared, but something underneath it all had begun to shift. Subtle at first, almost unnoticeable until it wasn't. Because Rory did not step into the world Tiger had built. He played as if it did not need to be followed. There was a freedom in the way he moved through a round. Not careless, not reckless, but unburdened. The kind of swing that generated speed without strain. The kind of scoring that could change a leaderboard in a matter of holes, not over the course of an entire day. And most importantly, the kind of mindset that did not carry the weight that defined the players before him. He was not trying to manage the moment. He was accelerating through it. That changes the dynamic immediately. For years, Tiger had understood how pressure worked. He knew when it would rise, when it would break someone, when patience would be enough. He had built an entire approach around that rhythm. Control the pace, and the rest would follow. Rory did not wait for that pace. When he found momentum, it did not build slowly. It came in waves. Birdies arriving in clusters, each one tightening the space before anyone else could respond. And when that happens, the game does not feel like something you are shaping anymore. It feels like something moving ahead of you. There were tournaments where this became clear early. Not on the final holes, not in the closing stretch, but from the start. A round that opened with intent that never gave the field a chance to settle, that forced everyone else into a position they did not choose. Tiger had spent years putting others in that position. Now he was standing inside it. And that is a different kind of realization. Because it is not just about the shots being played, it is about what they represent. A shift in how the game is approached. A version of golf that leans into speed, into power, into a kind of confidence that does not hesitate. Against Rory, the question was no longer about control. It was about adaptation. Do you hold on to the structure that defined your dominance, or do you try to match something that is evolving in real time? Neither answer is simple. Because one risks falling behind slowly, the other risks losing the identity that brought you to the top. There were moments when the gap felt small, manageable, a few shots here, a few decisions there, but even a small gap becomes difficult to close when the direction of the game itself is changing. And that is what Rory represented, not just another opponent, but the next version of the sport, arriving before the previous one had fully stepped away. For Tiger, that meant something deeper than a difficult round or a challenging tournament. It meant facing a future that did not necessarily move at his pace. And that is a challenge no amount of control can fully resolve. What stays in the end is not a list of names. It is a pattern. 5 different players, 5 different moments, 5 different ways the game pushed back against a man who seemed for a time impossible to move. One refused to react. One refused to fade. One refused to follow the structure. One refused to make mistakes. And one refused to play the same game at all. That is what makes them difficult to forget. Not because of what they won, but because of what they demanded. They forced adjustments that were not expected. They created questions that did not have easy answers. They pulled the game into spaces where control was no longer guaranteed, where certainty began to thin, where even the most dominant presence had to stop and reconsider. And in doing so, they shaped something that goes beyond rivalry. Because the opponents who matter most are not the ones you simply overcome. They are the ones who leave something behind. A shift in how you think, a change in how you approach the moment, a quiet understanding that no matter how complete your game feels, there is always something waiting that does not fit inside it. That is what stays. Not the trophies, not the scorecards, but the feeling of being pushed just far enough to realize where the edge truly is. You have reached the end of the story. But this is the part most people get wrong. They think a list like this is about ranking opponents, about deciding who was better, who mattered more, who stood above the rest. That is the easy version, the version that fits into numbers, into records, into something clean. This was never that. Because none of these names exist here for the same reason. One did not respond. One did not slow down. One did not follow the rules. One did not make mistakes. And one did not belong to the same version of the game. That is not a ranking. That is a map. A map of the moments where control slipped even slightly, where the rhythm that had defined an era met something it could not fully shape, where the game for brief stretches or longer moved in a direction that did not wait, and that is the part that stays with you longer than any victory. Because dominance, no matter how complete it looks from the outside, is always built inside a structure. A way of understanding the course, the field, the pressure, a belief that if you stay within that structure you can manage anything that comes. These 5 names sit just outside that belief, not breaking it completely, but pressing against it enough to reveal where it ends. And once you see that edge, you do not forget it. That is what makes certain opponents different. They are not defined by how often they beat you. They are defined by what they force you to confront. A version of the game you cannot control, a version of yourself you have not fully understood, and a moment where the outcome is no longer something you can quietly shape from the inside. For Tiger, those moments did not define his career, but they defined its boundaries, and sometimes that matters more. Because in the end, the legacy of a player is not only measured by how far they pushed the game forward, it is also measured by the forces that pushed back, and the few names that even now still carry that weight.